The stars had never looked so peaceful to the people of Earth. And that was the cruelest part of what was about to happen in the year 2347. Humanity had spread across 3 solar systems and built cities on distant moons and red planets. Yet they remained completely unaware of the danger racing toward them through the darkness of space. 500 warships moved in perfect silence beyond the orbit of Neptune, their engines running cold and their weapons powered down to avoid detection. And aboard the lead vessel stood High Sovereign Kelvos of the Velthari Dominion, watching the small blue planet on his view screen with eyes that held nothing but contempt. The Velthari had ruled 2,000 worlds for longer than humanity had existed as a species. And they had learned one truth above all others. Some species were too dangerous to let grow. Humanity was one such species. Kel Voss had read the reports from his scouts and spies who had watched Earth for the past century, and what he saw terrified him in ways he would never admit to his officers. These humans bred like insects and spread like a virus across every rock they could reach. And they fought wars against each other with a brutality that made even Velthari soldiers uncomfortable. And worst of all, they never stopped advancing their technology, no matter how many times they nearly destroyed themselves. Dominion Council had debated for decades about what to do with this troublesome species. And in the end, they had reached the only logical conclusion. Humanity must be erased before they became too strong to stop. Status report, Kelvos commanded, his voice cold and smooth like polished metal. All ships are in position. High Sovereign. His tactical officer responded with a bow of respect. Earth's sensor arrays have not detected our presence, and their defense fleet remains scattered across the inner planets without any sign of alert. Kelvos allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction because this would be easy. Almost disappointingly, so the humans had only 40 warships to defend their entire civilization. And those vessels were primitive things powered by fusion reactors, and armed with weapons that could barely scratch. Velthari hull plating. In 12 hours we will reach optimal firing range, the tactical officer continued. And then we can begin the cleansing operation. Cleansing was the word the Dominion used when they wiped out entire species. And Kelvos had overseen 7 such operations during his long career. But this one felt different somehow, more important than the others. If they failed here, if even a small number of humans escaped into the wider galaxy, the consequences could be catastrophic. There will be no survivors, Kelvos declared to his bridge crew. Every colony will be destroyed, every ship will be hunted down, and every trace of human existence will be erased from the universe. His officers nodded in agreement because they understood what was at stake, and they began preparing their weapons with the cold efficiency that had made the Velthari feared across 1,000 star systems, far away on Earth. A young girl named Maya was looking up at the night sky from her bedroom window in New Tokyo, dreaming about the stars and wondering if anyone else was out there looking. Back at her, she had no way of knowing that 500 alien warships were racing toward her home with orders to kill everyone she had ever loved. And she had no way of knowing that in just a few hours her entire world would change forever on Mars. Construction workers were building the framework for a new atmospheric processor that would one day help make the red planet breathable. And they laughed and joked with each other as they worked because life was good and the future looked bright in Europa. Scientists were drilling through miles of ice to study the alien microbes swimming in the ocean below. And they celebrated each new discovery with the excitement of children opening gifts, because they believed they were writing the next chapter of human knowledge. None of them knew that death was coming for them all. President Amara Okonkwo sat in her office in the United Earth capital and reviewed reports about trade, disputes, and colony funding requests, never suspecting that these mundane problems would soon seem laughably unimportant. She was a good leader who cared deeply about her people. But she was completely unprepared for what was about to happen, because no human leader had ever faced an enemy like the Velthari Dominion. United Earth Defense Force conducted routine patrols through the asteroid belt. Their crews bored and restless because nothing exciting ever happened on these missions. And they complained to each other about the bad food and the long shifts without any idea that they would soon be fighting for the survival of their Species Admiral Chun Wei Lin reviewed fleet readiness, reports from his command station, orbiting Earth, and frowned at the numbers because his ships were old and his crews were undertrained and his budget had been cut for. The 5th year in a row, we need more resources, he said to his aide for what felt like the 1,000th time. If something ever actually threatens Earth, we will not be ready to stop it. His aide nodded sympathetically. But they both knew that the politicians would never approve more military spending because humanity had no enemies and war was a thing of the past. How wrong they were. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden inside a hollowed-out rock that had been slowly drifting through space for over 2 centuries, something ancient began to wake. Sensors that had been dormant for generations suddenly flickered to life, detecting the energy signatures of 500 alien warships moving toward the inner planet's alarms. That had not sounded in 258 years began to wail through corridors that smelled of rust and old memories, and in a command chair at the heart of the impossible vessel, a man who should have died long ago opened his eyes and looked at the tactical display with a weariness that came from fighting wars that no one on Earth would ever know about. Captain James Ashford of the UEN Prometheus had finally come home, and he had arrived just in time to watch his world die, unless he did something about Ive, reached for the communication controls with hands that had grown old and scarred from centuries of battle, and he prepared to announce his return to a humanity that had long since forgotten he ever existed. Velthari thought they were coming to destroy a defenseless species. They had no idea what was waiting for them in the darkness between the stars. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun was having the most boring shift of her life aboard the mining vessel Prospect. When she first saw them, she had been staring at her sensor screen for 6 hours with nothing to look at except rocks and more rocks. And she was thinking about what she would eat for dinner when 500 points of light suddenly appeared at the edge of her display. What in the world is that? She whispered to herself as she leaned closer to the screen. The lights were moving in perfect formation toward the inner planets, and they were moving fast, much faster than any human ship could travel. Her hands began to shake as she realized what she was looking at, because those were not asteroids, and they were not comets, and they were definitely not human vessels. Captain, she screamed into the intercom, you need to see this right now. Captain Rodriguez rushed onto the bridge with sleep still in his eyes and coffee stains on his shirt. But the moment he saw the sensor display, all traces of tiredness vanished from his face. Send the distress call to Earth Command immediately, he ordered with a voice that trembled despite his best efforts to stay calm. Tell them we have contact with unknown vessels, at least 500 of them, heading toward the inner solar system at high speed. The message raced toward Earth at the speed of light. But even light takes time to travel across the vastness of space. And for 8 long minutes, humanity remained unaware of the doom approaching them. When the message finally reached Earth, it caused an explosion of panic that spread faster than any plague. President Okonkwo was pulled from her bed by frantic aides, who shoved a tablet into her hands, showing the sensor data. And for a long moment, she could only stare at the screen in disbelief. This must be a mistake, she said. But she knew in her heart that it was not. Admiral Chun Wei-lin scrambled every ship in the defense fleet and ordered them to form a defensive line near Mars. But his hands were steady, Even as his mind raced with terrible calculations, 40 ships against 500 was not a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. "We need to evacuate as many people as possible," he said to his officers. "Get the civilian transports ready and start moving people to the outer colonies." But everyone in the room knew the truth. There was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, because the alien ships were too fast and too numerous to escape on Earth. The news spread through every city and town and village like wildfire, and people reacted in different ways depending on who they were. Some fell to their knees and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Some held their families close and whispered words of love and comfort. Some rioted in the streets because they could not accept that this was how their story would end. And some, like little Maya in New Tokyo, simply looked up at the sky and wondered why the stars had turned against them. President Okonkwo addressed the world from her office with tears in her eyes that she did not bother to hide. "My fellow humans," she began, "we face a threat unlike anything in our history. But I want you to know that we will not surrender and we will not give up. And we will fight with everything we have until our last breath." It was a brave speech, but everyone who heard it knew that bravery alone could not stop 500 warships. The military prepared every weapon they had, including nuclear missiles that had been built during darker times when humans still feared each other more than the stars. And they pointed those missiles at the approaching fleet with the grim knowledge that even nuclear fire might not be enough. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, something impossible happened. Every sensor array in the solar system detected a new contact emerging from asteroid 2089 Kappa in the middle of the belt. And the readings made no sense at all. The ship that emerged from the hollowed-out rock was unmistakably human in design, with the familiar angles and shapes that Earth engineers had used for centuries. But its technology was beyond anything humanity had ever built. It radiated energy signatures that Earth's best scientists could not identify. And it moved with a speed and grace that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. Admiral Chun stared at the data with his mouth hanging open in shock. "That ship," he whispered, "is broadcasting an old Earth Navy identification code. The code belonged to a vessel called the UN Prometheus, a ship that had been declared lost 258 years ago during humanity's first attempt at interstellar travel, a mission that had officially been erased from history after it failed. But here it was, impossibly real, emerging from the darkness. Like a ghost returning from the grave, the voice that came through the communication channels was old and tired, but filled with a strength that made everyone who heard it stop and listen. "This is the UN Prometheus to Earth Command," Captain James Ashford said. "We are sorry we are late, but we have been away for a very long time, and we have finally found our way home." There was a pause that seemed to last forever before he continued. "We see that you have some uninvited guests approaching your home, and we would very much like to help you deal with them, because we have learned a few things during our time in the void, and we have brought some of those things back with us." President Okonkwo grabbed the nearest microphone with shaking hands. "Prometheus, this is President Okonkwo of United Earth," she said. "We thought you were lost forever. We thought everyone aboard your ship was dead. And we have so many questions about where you have been and how you survived. Those questions will have to wait," Ashford replied, "because right now we have 500 alien warships to deal with, and I promise you that they have no idea what they have gotten themselves into." Across the solar system, the Velthari fleet had stopped its advance high. Sovereign Kelvos stared at the impossible ship on his display with eyes that had suddenly gone wide with fear. His tactical officers were running analysis after analysis of the Prometheus, and every result made them more afraid than the last. The technology aboard that ancient human vessel was not just advanced. It was terrifying, surpassing even the mighty Dominion in ways that should not have been possible. How? Kelvas demanded. How can a primitive human ship possess such power? None of his officers had an answer, and for the first time in his long career of conquest and destruction, the High Sovereign of the Velthari Dominion felt the cold touch of doubt creeping into his heart. Something had changed. Something had gone very wrong with their perfect plan, and aboard the Prometheus, Captain James Ashford looked at the tactical display showing 500 enemy warships and smiled a smile that held no joy. Only the grim determination of a man who had spent 258 years fighting his way back home and would not let anything stop him now. The story of the Prometheus was a story of survival against impossible odds, and it began 258 years ago, when humanity was young and foolish and desperate to reach the stars. The ship had launched in 2089 with a crew of 200 brave souls who volunteered to test an experimental faster-than-light drive. Knowing that they might never return home, they were right to be afraid. The drive malfunctioned during its first activation and tore a hole in the fabric of space itself, dragging the Prometheus through a wormhole that should not have existed, and dumping them in a galaxy so far from Earth that the light from their sun would take millions of years to reach. Them Captain James Ashford had been a young man then, barely 30 years old, with a wife waiting for him back on Earth and dreams of coming home, a hero instead. He found himself stranded in a universe of nightmares. The galaxy they had fallen into was old and cruel and filled with species that had been fighting wars since before humanity learned to walk upright. And the Prometheus was alone and outgunned and very far from home. But humans do not give up easily, and James Ashford refused to let his crew die in the darkness between the stars. They fought their first battle 3 days after arriving, when a pirate vessel attacked them for their supplies. And Ashford learned that day that violence was a language that every species in the universe could understand. The pirates died, and the Prometheus took their weapons and their fuel and kept moving over the years that followed. Ashford and his crew became something new, something harder and fiercer than the hopeful explorers who had left Earth so long ago. They found dead civilizations on abandoned worlds and scavenged technology that had been lost for millennia. They made alliances with desperate species who taught them secrets in exchange for protection. They fought wars that would fill 1,000 history books against enemies whose names humanity would never know, and they never stopped trying to find a way home. The original crew of 200 had children aboard the ship, and those children grew up learning how to fight and survive in a universe that wanted them dead. And they had children of their own, and generation after generation was born in the void. They called themselves the Returned, because returning home was the one dream they all shared, passed down from parent to child like a sacred promise. Now there were 3,000 of them, hardened warriors who had survived things that would break lesser beings, and they had finally found their way back to Earth. Captain Ashford stood on the bridge of his battered ship and looked at the 500 Velthari warships blocking his path, and he felt nothing but cold determination. He had faced worse odds before. Open a channel to the enemy flagship. He commanded his communications officer, a young woman named Yuki, who had been born aboard the Prometheus and had never seen Earth with her own eyes, nodded and made it happen. Channel open. Captain High Sovereign Kelvos appeared on the view screen, his alien face twisted with anger and confusion. Human vessel? Kelvos demanded. Identify yourself and explain how you possess technology that surpasses our own. Ashford leaned back in his command chair and studied the alien with eyes that had seen too much death and too much war. My name is James Ashford, captain of the UEN Prometheus, he said calmly, and I am here to ask you a simple question. Do you really want to do this? Kelvas snarled at the display. You are one ship against 500, he said, Your bravery is impressive but foolish. And you will die alongside the rest of your pathetic species. Ashford shook his head slowly. You do not understand, he said. You think you are coming here to destroy a young and helpless civilization, but you are wrong about that. He stood up from his chair and walked closer to the view screen. I have spent 258 years fighting my way across a galaxy that makes your Dominion look like children playing with toys. He continued, I have killed things that would make your soldiers weep with terror, and I have taken their weapons and their ships and their secrets. His voice grew harder with every word. You are not the first species to try and destroy humanity. High Sovereign, and you are not the 100th. And every single one of them learned the same lesson that you are about to learn. Kelvas felt something cold crawling up his spine, something he had not felt in centuries. Fear. What lesson is that? He asked, despite himself. Ashford smiled. And it was not a pleasant smile. Humanity does not know how to die, he said. We get knocked down and we get back up. We lose battles and we learn from them. We face extinction and we find a way to survive, and we never, ever stop fighting. He pointed directly at the Velthari commander. So here is your choice. You can turn your fleet around and go home and tell your masters that Earth is not worth the cost. Or you can stay and fight, and I promise you that if you stay, I will teach you things about war that your species has never imagined. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Kelvas laughed, a harsh sound filled with wounded pride. You are brave. Human, but you are also delusional, he said. One ship cannot defeat 500, no matter what tricks you have learned in your travels. Perhaps not, Ashford admitted, but I do not need to defeat you. I only need to hurt you badly enough that you decide this mission is not worth completing. And believe me when I tell you that I can hurt you very badly indeed. The channel closed, and Ashford turned to face his crew. 3,000 souls looked back at him. Humans who had been born among the stars and raised for war, and in their eyes he saw the same fierce determination that had kept them alive for so long. All hands to battle stations, he ordered. Power up all weapon systems and prepare for combat. Yuki looked up from her console with a question in her eyes. Captain, do you really think we can stop them? Ashford looked out at the stars that surrounded them, the same stars he had dreamed of reaching when he was a young man full of hope. I think we can make them regret ever coming here, he said, and sometimes that is enough. The Prometheus began to move, its ancient engines roaring with power that had been gathered from a dozen dead civilizations, and weapons that had never been seen in this part of the galaxy, powered up with a sound like thunder on the Velthari flagship. Tactical officers watched their displays with growing horror as they realized what they were facing. High Sovereign, one of them said with a trembling voice, those weapons are capable of destroying our ships with single shots, and their shields are stronger than anything we have ever encountered. Kelvas gripped the arms of his command chair until his knuckles turned white. He had come here expecting an easy victory, but now he was beginning to understand that nothing about humanity would ever be easy. The first shot of the Battle of Sol came from the Velthari flagship, a blazing lance of blue energy that screamed across the void toward the Prometheus. Ashford watched it come and did not even blink. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered calmly, and the ancient ship twisted out of the way with a grace that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. The Velthari beam missed by less than 100 meters and continued into the darkness of space. Return fire, Ashford commanded. Target their flagship and show them what we learned in the void. The Prometheus responded with weapons that had been salvaged from a species that died fighting wars before the Velthari had discovered fire. And the results were devastating. A beam of pure, white light struck the eternal judgment and tore through its shields like they were made of paper, carving a massive wound across the hull and killing 300. Crew members in an instant. High Sovereign Kel Voss was thrown from his command chair by the impact. And when he climbed back to his feet, his face was covered in blood from a cut on his forehead. Impossible. He screamed, "All ships attack! Destroy that vessel now." 500 warships opened fire at once, and the space around the Prometheus erupted into a hellstorm of energy. Beams and missiles and weapons that turned the darkness into deadly light, but the Prometheus danced through the storm like it had been born for this moment. Ashford had spent 258 years fighting enemies that made the Velthari look like amateurs, and every lesson he had learned was programmed into his ship's computers. Prometheus dodged and weaved and returned fire with deadly precision, and every shot it fired found its target. Velthari ships exploded one after another, their crews never even understanding what had killed them. But Ashford knew the truth that his crew did not want to hear. They could not win this fight. The Prometheus was powerful, but it was one ship against 500, and even the greatest warrior eventually runs out of strength. How long until the Earth fleet arrives? He asked his tactical officer. 6 hours at their current speed. Came the reply. 6 hours was an eternity in a battle like this. Ashford made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. However long that might be, open a secure channel to Earth Command, he ordered, and begin transmitting everything we have. The data burst that followed contained 258 years of technological advancement compressed into a stream of information that would change humanity forever. Shield frequencies that could stop Velthari weapons, designs that could tear through Velthari, armor engine modifications that could make human ships faster, and more maneuverable tactical algorithms that could help human commanders outsmart their enemies. Everything the returned had learned, everything they had fought and died for, was given freely to their cousins on Earth. Admiral Chun received the transmission and stared at his screen with tears streaming down his face. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This technology is centuries beyond anything we have, but impossible or not, it was real." And he immediately ordered his engineers to begin implementing whatever they could in the time they had on Mars and Earth and Europa. Scientists and engineers worked frantically to understand the gift they had been given. Installing new weapons and shields on any ship that could fly, they worked without sleep and without rest because they knew that the Prometheus was dying to buy them time, and the Prometheus was dying hour after hour. The ancient ship fought against overwhelming odds, destroying Velthari vessels by the dozens, but taking damage with every passing minute. Sections of the hull were breached and sealed, and crew members died at their stations and were replaced by others who knew they would likely share the same fate. Yuki took a piece of shrapnel through her shoulder, but refused to leave her post, continuing to manage communications with one arm hanging useless at her side. The chief engineer, a man named Torres, who had been born aboard the ship 60 years ago, held the engines together through sheer willpower and creative cursing, and Captain Ashford stood on the bridge through it all, giving orders and making decisions that sent his people to their deaths, because there was no other choice. By the time the Earth fleet finally arrived, the Prometheus had destroyed over 200 Velthari warships. But the cost had been terrible. Half the crew was dead, and the ship itself was barely holding together. "Captain," Yuki said with pain in her voice, "Earth fleet is entering weapons range, and they are armed with our technology." Ashford allowed himself a moment of hope for the first time in hours. "Show me," he said on the view screen. 40 human ships appeared from the direction of Mars, and they were not the primitive vessels that the Velthari had expected. They had been transformed by the technology from the Prometheus, their weapons glowing with the same deadly light, and their shields humming with power that had never been seen in this part of the galaxy. The nuclear missiles that humanity had prepared had been modified too, turned into weapons that could crack Velthory hulls like eggshells. Admiral Chun's voice came through the communication channel, strong and clear. "Prometheus, this is Admiral Chun of the United Earth Defense Force, and we are here to finish what you started." The Earth fleet crashed into the Velthory formation like a hammer striking glass ships that had never seen real combat, fought with the fury of soldiers defending their homes. And the technology from the Prometheus made them deadly beyond anything the young Velthory had imagined. High Sovereign Kelvos watched his tactical display turn red with destroyed ships and felt his certainty crumble into dust. "This cannot be happening," he said to no one in particular. They were supposed to be helpless. They were supposed to be easy prey. But humanity had never been easy prey. And now they were fighting alongside warriors who had spent centuries learning how to kill. The Velthory formation broke ships began to flee toward the edge of the system, their captains deciding that survival was more important than following Order. Skelvis screamed commands to hold the line, but his fleet was shattering around him, and even his own crew was looking at him with doubt in their eyes. In the end, it was not a victory for either side, but a lesson. The Velthory lost nearly 300 ships before Kelvos finally ordered the retreat, his flagship limping away into fold space with the survivors of his once mighty armada and the Prometheus, the ancient ship that had fought its way across a galaxy to come home. Finally, when quiet, its engines died and its weapons powered down, and it drifted in the void like a broken thing, surrounded by the wreckage of the battle it had won. But on its bridge, Captain James Ashford was still alive, slumped in his command chair with blood on his uniform and a smile on his face. "We did it," he whispered to whoever could still hear him. "We made it home." The Earth ships surrounded the Prometheus and began rescue operations, pulling the surviving return from their dying vessel and bringing them to safety and across the solar system. Humanity looked up at the stars and understood that everything had changed forever. 3 days after the Battle of Sol, Captain James Ashford lay in a hospital bed on Earth and watched the sun rise over the mountains through his window. He had dreamed of this moment for 258 years, and now that it was finally here, he found that he did not have words big enough to describe how it felt. The doctors had done everything they could, but the technology that had kept him alive for so long was failing at last, and they could not replace what they did not understand. President Okonkwo sat beside his bed, holding his weathered hand in both of hers, and she did not try to hide the tears that ran down her cheeks. "You saved us all," she said softly. "Everything humanity is, and everything we will become, we owe to you and your crew." Ashford smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had finally found peace after a lifetime of war. "We did what we had to do," he said, his voice weak but steady. "We never stopped believing that we would make it home. And when we finally saw Earth on our sensors, after all those years, we knew that we could not let anyone take it away." He turned his head to look out the window again, drinking in the sight of blue skies and white clouds and green trees that his people had only known from stories. "My wife," he said suddenly. "Her name was Elena, and she was waiting for me when I left. And I never got to tell her goodbye." Okonkwo squeezed his hand. "We found her grave," she said gently. "She never married again, and she never stopped believing that you would come back. And on her gravestone she had them write the words, 'Waiting for James.'" Ashford closed his eyes and let the tears fall. "Then she knew," he whispered. "She knew I would never stop trying." The room was quiet for a long moment, filled only with the sounds of machines and the distant song of birds outside the window. "Tell me about the returned," Okonkwo said. "Tell me about the people you brought home." Ashford's eyes opened again, and pride filled his voice as he spoke. "They are the best humanity has to offer," he said. "Every single one of them was born in the void, in a universe that wanted them dead. And they survived because they refused to give up. because they carried the dream of Earth in their hearts, even though they had never seen it. He coughed, and a nurse rushed forward to help him. But he waved her away. They are warriors and scientists, and engineers and artists, he continued. They know things that your people cannot imagine, and they have fought battles that would fill 1,000 books. And they did it all because they believed that one day they would find their way home. President Okonkwo nodded. We will honor them, she promised. We will give them everything they need to build new lives here. And we will never forget what they sacrificed for us. That is all I ask. Ashford said he was quiet for a while, and Okonkwo thought he might have fallen asleep, but then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. What will humanity do now? He asked. Now that you know you are not alone in the universe, now that you know there are species out there who want you dead? Okonkwo thought about the question for a long time before answering. We will build a fleet, she said finally. We will take the technology your people gave us, and we will make ourselves strong enough that no one will ever threaten us again. And then? Ashford asked. And then we will go out into the galaxy, and we will find every species that ever thought about destroying us, she said. Not for revenge, but to let them know that we are here, and we are not going anywhere. Ashford smiled one last time. Good, he said. That is very good. He took a deep breath and looked out at the sun one more time. I am very tired, he said. I think I would like to rest now. Then rest, Okonkwo said. You have earned it. Captain James Ashford closed his eyes and let go of the strength that had kept him alive for so long. And surrounded by the sights and sounds of the home he had fought so hard to reach, he died in peace. The funeral was broadcast to every human settlement in 3 solar systems, and billions of people watched as the man who had saved their species was laid to rest. Returned stood in formation around his grave. 3,000 men and women who had followed him across the stars, and they sang a song in a language that no one on Earth had ever heard, a song of loss and love and the promise of Homaya. The little girl from New Tokyo, who had watched the stars on the night the aliens came, stood at the edge of the crowd with her parents, and she made a silent promise to herself that she would never forget the man who had saved her world in the weeks and months that followed. They returned integrated into human society and shared their knowledge. Freely, scientists gained access to discoveries that would have taken centuries to achieve on their own. Engineers built new ships based on designs from species that had died before humanity was born, and the children of the returned went to schools on Earth and Mars and Europa, learning about a world they had only known from stories and making friends with cousins they had never met. The Prometheus itself, too damaged to ever fly again, was towed into orbit around Earth and turned into a museum, and memorial visitors walked through its ancient corridors and saw the scorch marks from battles fought in distant galaxies. And they read the names of every crew member who had died during the long journey home 10 years after the battle. A Velthari diplomat sat across from a human ambassador in a conference room on a neutral station at the edge of known space. The aliens' hands trembled as the humans slid a document across the table. This is a non-aggression treaty, the ambassador said, her voice calm and professional. Sign it, and we will have peace between our peoples. The Velthari looked at the document and then at the human, and fear flickered in his eyes. You could have destroyed us, he said, after what we tried to do to your world. You could have come to our systems and burned everything we have. The ambassador nodded. Yes, we could have, she admitted, but that is not who we are, and that is not who we want to become. She leaned forward. You came to our home to kill us, and instead you woke us up, she said. You showed us that the universe is dangerous and that we need to be strong. And for that we are almost grateful. Her eyes hardened. But do not mistake our mercy for weakness, she continued. We remember what you tried to do, and we will never forget. And if you ever threaten us again, we will respond with everything we have." The Velthari diplomat signed the treaty with shaking hands word, spread through the galaxy faster than light could travel, carried by traders and travelers and refugees from 100 different species. Humanity was no longer a young and helpless civilization waiting to be destroyed. Humanity was awake, and humanity was angry, and humanity was building a fleet that would make empires tremble. And in the heart of that fleet, in ships that carried names like Prometheus and Ashford and returned, humans looked out at the stars and smiled. They had survived the darkness and found their way home. And they would never let anyone take that away from them again, because humanity does not know how to stay down. Humanity adapts, humanity fights, humanity remembers, and humanity was only getting started.